In the beginning of the 21st century, there was a realization that this is not about merchandising at its core.
I'm so excited, I can't even stand it.
But actually it's about characters that are beloved around the world by a whole hell of a lot of people who really give a damn. And that the audience had become a little bit too sophisticated to simply make fun of their superheroes.
Comics aren't all about fun and games. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a childish thing. It's an art form in its own right, and that's what he's taken it to.
And the dawning finally that it did matter.
A cancer survivor with a wish to spend a day as Bat-Kid.
The bar would be raised so high that all of a sudden audiences could walk out of a movie based on a comic book. And instead of saying, that was a great comic book movie, at last what they could say, that was a great film.
How the hell does someone talk about The Dark Knight today? How do I even begin to talk about such a touchstone of film history, one of the most influential and important films of all time that played such a pivotal role in not only my love of film, but countless others?
The Dark Knight movies did establish that these kind of movies can be serious artistic objects in addition to being big pop culture blockbusters. These movies are in another category. I mean, the Dark Knight movies, to me, recall things like the Godfather trilogy and other sort of epic narratives in American cinema.
Everyone knows it's a masterpiece. Everyone is aware of its depth and impact. Everything that could possibly be said about it
that movie
has been said, and it's still considered the gold standard for comic book movies. It might not be your favorite, but it is widely considered the best. And even I, someone whose favorite movie in Nolan's Batman trilogy is The Dark Knight Rises, can't deny that The Dark Knight is a once-in-a-generation, holy shit movie that completely upended what the genre can and should be. Nothing I say in this video is going to change anyone's mind, nor is it designed to do that. I'm not saying anything controversial, but that's also the point. Sometimes it's worth appreciating the greats and meditating on that greatness, reconnecting with the very reason why you love the film, and hopefully, by extension, why you love film as an art form to begin with. And weirdly, in this day and age, I feel like The Dark Knight is a film that's taken for granted.
The general public, they just see it as a good, cool summer movie. But do they understand, like, the difference? I don't know. I hope they do. But in truth, if you really drill down on the difference, it's pretty vast and pretty incredible.
So many of us talk about films that are unanimously praised and mean a lot to us in such surface-level ways, treating it as if it's always been that way instead of reconnecting with the heart of why it became such a transcendent piece of art in the first place. If we only talked about the films we had hot takes on or didn't like and never talked about the masterpieces, I mean, what exactly are we doing? And yet,
for all the money the pictures made, as good as the movies are, these movies are sadly underappreciated as works of art and as works of drama.
The Dark Knight isn't just a great comic book movie, it's one of the best films ever made. It stood the test of time and deserves to be given the respect it deserves. I have some thoughts. Thoughts that have evolved over the 16 years since its release, and thoughts that have rattled around my head for the better part of a year since revisiting it on the big screen. For me, I mean, if you followed this channel for any period of time, you know that I love Christopher Nolan. He's my favorite filmmaker. His films had such a profound impact on me growing up, and that Batman trilogy was a massive part of it. Batman Begins was like a cinematic awakening for me, and I remember waiting with bated breath for the sequel. I remember seeing the first trailer for The Dark Knight and just speculating to hell about what was going on in this thing. I mean, it just grabbed hold of me in a way very few trailers do because it gave you just the right amount. And I rewatched Batman Begins endlessly as a kid, and I was just thinking about how The Dark Knight was going to come together, how whatever sequel to Batman Begins was going to exist and further the mythology that Christopher Nolan built in that first film. I got swept up in the viral marketing of that film. It was unlike any sort of marketing campaign that had been realized prior. I mean, they had like fake Gotham City Tonight news clips where Harvey Dent would come on and talk about,
if you want to get rid of the Batman, then curing what created him is the best way.
There was a Jokerized version of the Dark Knight trailer. They had in-person Harvey Dent rallies. This was unlike any marketing campaign that had ever existed, and it was exciting. It was the movie to see that year. Everyone wanted to go to that midnight screening. I needed to go to that midnight screening. And I remember watching the film and just being stunned into silence. I couldn't comprehend the magnificent piece of cinema that I had just witnessed. But look, I could gush about it like a kid all day long, but I want to talk about why I love this film, why it's one of the greats, why it's not only one of the greats, but why it's a great adaptation that actually treats the comics with enough respect to pull out the depth and is less concerned with simply aping the iconography, but rather uncovering what's underneath that iconography, and why that very reason I feel has been lost a bit in the time since.
How do you make a film that fans want to go see, an event that everyone has to go see?
In the case of The Dark Knight, I think was very involving and very entertaining in a marketing sense. The concept of viral marketing being something quite new and fresh at the time, as applied to a big blockbuster in the way we did.
Anyone could argue that this trilogy fundamentally rewrote the book on the superhero movie, and its ripple effects are so far reaching. You can see it in other superhero movies, how their advertising campaigns trying to employ a lot of the same techniques to showcase that this movie genre has grown up and it is cinematic.
These three films have absolutely redefined how the world will see Batman moving forward in any other iteration that may come along. This will be the barometer.
At the beginning of The Dark Knight, you see that Bruce Wayne and his Batman persona have matured. He's really the fully formed Batman from the comics. But he's also in a place where he's having to question, having to gauge the response to his presence in Gotham that he's seeing. He's seeing a rise in copycats and vigilantism and all kinds of things going on, and an escalation of the war with organized crime. And so there are a lot of potentially negative consequences of his crusade brewing in Gotham at the beginning of the film.
If Batman Begins is Bruce learning to do what is necessary in order to inspire Gotham City, The Dark Knight is Bruce directly grappling with the consequences and sacrifice of being Batman.
If some little guy is getting picked on, it's important for us to come sort of sweeping in there and beat up the big bad aggressor. And just like Batman does, but then you have to stop and think, but during the process of doing that, what is the consequence of my action? And am I creating any jokers in the process? Because there's going to be an effect of what I've just done. The Joker is essentially going to exist now. He is the consequence of my action, and I'm going to have to deal with that.
I was meant to inspire good, not madness, not death.
You have inspired good, but you spat in the faces of Gotham's criminals. Didn't you think there might be some casualties?
Unpicking the knot of class, wealth, and entitlement that had hobbled previous adaptations, Nolan fills his Bruce Wayne with self-loathing. He accepts the roughness of his handling almost as a kind of punishment for what he sees as his part in his parents' death, but also for the very fact of his pampered existence. He's slumming.
You care about justice? Look beyond your own pain, Bruce.
Batman is not a simple heroic figure, and that's the reason I was interested in him of all superheroes. He has no superpowers. He is the most human of superheroes, therefore, and I think he's very, very flawed, and I think that the more that those flaws are allowed to just bubble under the surface, I think it makes it more like real life, frankly. That's something that has struck a chord with me. It's this idea that if the seeds of your own destruction really are internal, they really are coming from inside yourself, it heightens everything and heightens the sense of tragedy to do with everything. In the case of Batman and this story, it's a question of finding the positivity in it. It's a question of saying, here is a character, like the protagonists of my other films, I think, who is driven by extraordinarily negative things. But what makes him a heroic figure, and it's something we had to constantly bear in mind, is the fact that he's able to channel these negative impulses into something positive. There's a lot of rage, a lot of anger that really, really motivates him, but he's trying to channel that into something good. But he's really playing with fire. You know, he's working outside the law. He's doing all kinds of very questionable things, but in the service of good. That really is riding this knife edge.
There's a more sophisticated idea at play there other than just pure virtue. And so I dig the idea that his biggest act of heroism in some ways is to be cast as the villain. Exactly what Harvey tells him in code is going to happen to him.
You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
The Joker's a really, really bad guy. And so it's not enough for him to kill you. or to torture you. What he's going to do is he's going to make you, he says it explicitly.
Tonight you're gonna break your one rule.
If you're foolish enough in his viewpoint to have dogma, he's going to smash you against it. Batman is out there doing something that's almost absurd. He is attempting to fight the most vicious, vile, dangerous, hostile criminals without taking life. This is close to a fool's errand, but it's why we love him. It's one of the reasons why his character is so enduring, because of this kind of insane choice he's made to be so good at what he does that he can kind of save everyone. And so, of course, to me, the best way to explore that idea is to challenge him.
You're gonna have to play my little game if you want to save one of them.
Bruce starts out with a worldview that his actions must be dictated by an ethical code, and by the end of the film, he comes to realize that's not possible. He can't be this paragon of virtue and enact positive change. He has to take the bullet. He comes to understand that in pursuit of this crusade, it is inevitable that his humanity will be tarnished in some capacity, whether or not that's killing Harvey Dent or torturing the Joker. His humanity becomes a casualty of the action. In order to do the right thing in the long run, he has to rise above his ego and do things he's morally against because it's the only way forward. That's the consequence of the crusade he's taken on. The public will hate him for it, but that's the sacrifice of being Batman. He's not a hero because he's more than a man. He's trying to succeed where his father and many other public figures have failed. Can Batman transcend being a mere individual and save Gotham? Or is he doomed to befall his father's fate? A good man who struggles to change a corrupt system only to wind up succumbing to it. But that's the thing about Batman. He can be whatever the city needs him to be at the time to create unity. He becomes a lightning rod for their frustrations to help lift them out of the darkness. It kills Bruce because he is so morally incorruptible and cares deeply for his city and its inhabitants. Rachel gave him hope that his crusade as Batman could come to an end, that it wasn't an eternal sacrifice, that someone like Harvey Dent could simply take his place and do it without a mask. But that's nothing more than a fool's dream. As Rachel says,
Bruce, don't make me your one hope for a normal life.
Putting your faith in one person to be your salvation isn't the answer. It's hopelessly naive. Devoting yourself to an idea, a cause, a belief is how you move forward. You aren't living for someone else, but rather something bigger than yourself. It's the same reason Batman succeeds where people like Thomas Wayne and Harvey Dent fail. It makes Harvey, especially, the perfect center of gravity for the entire conflict in this film.
At the beginning of The Dark Knight, you're looking at a character who has embarked on this crusade. He's looking for an end to it and sees in the person of Harvey Dent, the new district attorney in Gotham, he sees the response he was looking for. He sees the legitimate face of his campaign being taken over by Harvey Dent. And I think that pleases him for a couple of reasons. I mean, it pleases him in our story because this was his original aim, to see the good of Gotham rise again. But it also pleases him, I think, because he sees that he might be able to stop being Batman. He might be able to go back to having a relatively normal existence.
There's no going back. You've changed things.
My understanding of his story from the comic books, you were left with this idea of a character who was defined chiefly by tragedy, someone who is undone by their own goodness, in essence.
And it's not that Bruce hates being Batman. Quite the opposite. He sees it as a necessary good. But by burning his life to build a better city, there's an intense melancholy that sets in by way of the toll being the Caped Crusader takes on him. He still believes that a man can rise to the occasion and become Gotham's White Knight. The reality is that people are fallible. Harvey is the embodiment of the corruptibility of man. He's an idealist, can enact real change, but is still just a man. He can be destroyed or ignored. If anyone was going to succeed at making Bruce's wish come true, it was him, and even he failed because the Joker filled the Rachel-sized space in Harvey's heart with a void of despair.
When we were casting Harvey Dent, we were looking for somebody who could embody that all-American charm, that very heroic presence, but would also have this edge, would also have this undercurrent of anger and darkness to him that Harvey Dent needs. This guy has lengths he'd go to that are questionable, but you have to invest in him as a very attractive, heroic figure at the beginning of the movie.
I took Gotham's White Knight, and I
brought him down to our level.
I don't want to give the Joker authorship over Two-Face. I think Two-Face emerges from the tragic flaw of Harvey Dent, which is he's too good, too virtuous, too cocksure that he's going to be able to change Gotham, bring down all these criminals. He provides his own undoing. The Joker is just the little whisper in the ear.
Why should we try to be decent men in an indecent time if it all leads to pain and loss? Why not just give in? Bruce is the perfect counterpoint because despite all of that, the losses, the grief, the pain, he still manages to push through his limitations as a man because Batman has no limits. People need to believe that the world isn't as ugly as the Joker and are ready and willing to believe in good, something more. It's actually quite easy to fall into the trap of not caring, of severing all attachments and beliefs and mocking those who have them, of asking, what's the point? Of succumbing to nihilism and wreaking havoc for the fuck of it. But it amounts to nothing more than loneliness. Both Joker and Bruce share that loneliness, but one is a product of chronic self-destruction, while the other is a product of sacrifice. The Joker is obsessed with Batman, doesn't want to kill him, because his very existence proves his worldview wrong.
The Joker is what I'm afraid of more than anything, more than any of the villains, these days particularly, when you feel civilization is very thinly lined. I think the Joker represents the id in all of this. What do we worry about? What am I actually afraid of? What's the worst thing the villain could be doing? I don't have that anarchic impulse. I really don't. I'm much more controlled. I'm afraid of that in myself. I feel like I carefully used it as the engine of the movie, but I was afraid of it the whole time I was making the film.
One of, I think, society's most palpable fears is the fear of the collapse to anarchy, the idea of people in society who will not in any way be bound by any kind of convention, whether that of society or even the convention of criminal society within the larger society. Heath was somebody I'd met with over the years for different roles. We talked about Malcolm McDowell's performance of Clockwork Orange in the film, and we talked about Clockwork Orange, the book, and who Alex is in the book, because it's kind of different. We looked at paintings by Francis Bacon, visual reference. We looked at all kinds of things, talked about all kinds of different philosophical ideas behind the Joker and anarchy and chaos and what he would represent.
To me, it's this idea of barely contained horror, this idea of the primal barely held in by the structures of society. Whatever happened in that room of paintings echoes the way in which they were made. Very instinctive, very primal was his process, but he exercised absolute control, destroying canvases that he didn't like and so on. Very, very careful with how he presented his work. There's often this geometric mirror. It's a thing that's in a lot of his paintings. This little circle. It's ordered chaos. I think there are a lot of very savage and primal things in Bacon's work, and in the nature of the Joker, that aren't actually chaotic. They're actually quite controlled. In other words, the Joker is not disordered. He talks about chaos and thriving on chaos, but it's the creation of chaos. The way he creates is actually quite precise.
I think I'm very, very drawn to the bleakness of it, really, because I think whilst it might be emotionally uncomfortable, the bleakness of what he's trying to present there, it makes you think about the limitations of human experience, of human understanding of our own place in things and all of that. I really love the black spaces. It makes me think a lot about the geography of the painting, about where that figure sits in the world. I quite like the paradoxical nature of it. The more he removes, the less he tells you really about what's out there, the more I find myself thinking about what's in that dark space behind and everything. Because you never have the resources to fully create the world that you're creating, so you are leaving a lot of voids, you're leaving a lot of gaps. And so part of what you start trying to do is using those necessary gaps intelligently, so that where you're not showing something, it's helping you rather than feeling the limitations of the world you've created. The force of the Joker, the character, I like to say, sort of cuts through the story like the shark in Jaws. He's a force to be reacted to. As the Joker does things, it tests the characters. It forces them to confront things about themselves. I very much like that in terms of its approach to villainy, because I think that it puts it onto the characters that we already know, forced into very uncomfortable decisions and very paradoxical situations. And it tells you something about those characters. It reveals them in sort of new and interesting ways.
I wanted to see what you'd do. And you didn't disappoint.
In my imagination, there is no beginning or end to this character. He's kind of always existed. He's a bit of a devil. A specific backstory to this guy, authoritative, would be kind of reductive to his character.
You see, in their last moments, people show you who they really are.
The Joker is the very class of criminal that mocks society's laws because of how time and time again the system proves itself incapable of changing, of breaking the corrupt cycle it's fallen into. People like Gordon and Dent make the Joker roll his eyes because he sees their idealism as bullshit. Put them in the right scenario, push them far enough, and they'll become exactly who he thinks they are. Dent proves him right in a way, but he's the one holding the gun. He had a choice and chose to inflict his pain onto others. It's man's inclination to do what's fair.
It's not about what I want. It's about what's fair!
Instead of what's right. Leaving a life up to chance is fair, but it's also cruel and arbitrary. As a society, we should strive to be better.
I really enjoy telling stories where the protagonist is being undercut, is being undermined, and the villain is getting under their skin because they share knowledge. They share a point of view in some bizarre way, and the more bizarre in which you can find that relationship, I think, the more fun you can have with it. I think the Joker understands Batman, or feels he understands Batman, possibly in a way that Bruce Wayne doesn't entirely understand himself. And I think in the interrogation scene, it's interesting to see how the Joker is able to get under his skin. We like to think of our heroes, our heroic figures, as being immune to those kind of mind games. But of course, we all know that Batman is the most tortured and psychologically unbalanced in a way of these heroes. And so he's very vulnerable to the threat that the Joker poses, and we try and continually remind the audience of that during the course of the film.
Joker proceeds to bond with Batman, asserting grotesque intimacy with him.
To them, you're just a freak. Like me.
The only sensible way to live in this world is without rules, he says, smirking.
And tonight you're gonna break your one rule.
As the Joker's trolling reaches an unbearable point, Batman erupts. He's in control, says Gordon, watching through the glass. But by this point, you will have noticed the return of that single soaring cello note that announces an onset of the Joker's chaos. Something is wrong. Giggling excitably, like a schoolboy, the Joker unveils his infernal Sophie's choice.
Choose between one life or the other. Your friend, the district attorney, or his blushing bride to be.
The Joker isn't trying to defeat the forces of good. He's trying to reveal the very idea of goodness as a fraud. He is bent only on one thing: provocation.
You have nothing to threaten me with.
The thing about the Joker in The Dark Knight is that he isn't insane asylum loony bin crazy. He's in complete control of his faculties. He relies on the idea that people think he's crazy so that he can do whatever he needs to do to get what he wants, which is an upending of society. If that's pivoting to having everyone kill Coleman Reese, so be it. Part of his plan is everyone thinks he's crazy, so no one freaks out when he pivots because it's just what the Joker does. So it allows him the freedom to be flexible and pivot his plan to counter Batman and not seem like he's losing. Even Dent is a backup plan. The genius of Heath Ledger's performance is how organically he feels in the scene, not just reciting lines. He's just existing in the moment, eating or otherwise. This is what makes Heath Ledger's iconic improvisation where he blows up the hospital and he's trying to figure out why the detonator isn't working so genius. He organically inhabits the world in every scene he's in. In lesser hands, he would be rather one-dimensional, but that's not the case with Heath's Joker. The texture Ledger lends to the character is great. It's fantastic and memorable, but that's not why Ledger's performance is so highly regarded. Nor is it why he won an Oscar. It's because all of that texture and affectation is informed by character.
It really is a performance that is done with no safety net. It really just goes for broke, and those are the performances that endure.
Joker and Batman are both ethereal ideas who can be anyone, anywhere. The film never explicitly draws attention to this, it's just sort of self-evident. The Joker is the escalation to Batman, the armor-piercing round to Batman's Kevlar armor. In The Dark Knight, Batman is a performed theatricality from Bruce. Bruce plays Batman, but he's still Bruce. Whereas Joker doesn't have an alter ego. He's dedicated himself entirely to an idea and no longer has a sense of humanity or self. He's purely the symbol, the idea. The Joker is the embodiment of what Bruce was trained to do under the League of Shadows, fully committed and there to sow discord until the city destroys itself.
Time to spread the word. And the word is panic.
The Joker is who Bruce would have to become to
fulfill Ra's al Ghul's destiny.
Like Ra's, Joker believes that people are inherently cruel. He gives in to pessimism, and while Ra's uses it to justify controlling people and charting their destiny for them,
If someone stands in the way of true justice, you simply walk up behind them and stab them in the heart.
the Joker sees it as a rationale for disengaging from the rules of society altogether.
The only sensible way to live in this world is without rules.
While they might not follow the same set of rules, they ultimately arrive at the same conclusion, seeing the destruction of Gotham as necessary because people aren't worth saving. Batman is diametrically opposed to both of them. He holds firm to the belief that men are still good, and he clings to that despite his negative impulses. This comes to a head in the climactic fairy sequence where the Joker puts these two worldviews to the test.
Tonight, you're all going to be a part of a social experiment.
In the sequence in The Dark Knight, when the people were on the boat and they had to make a decision, do they press the button and blow up the other boatload full of people in order to save their own skin, or do they not?
So, who's it going to be? Harvey Dent's most wanted scumbag collection, or the sweet and innocent civilians?
I think the conundrum is more on the part of the innocent civilians, confronted with the idea of, well, do this benevolent thing to leave these hardened criminals alive, but do we really have to die?
Maybe revenge, killing, and self-preservation aren't actually worth the price you pay when you detonate the bomb. What's beautiful about that also is how it's a direct callback to what happened with Bruce and Joe Chill. Bruce is just another citizen of Gotham cursed by the same anger and bloodthirstiness that's corrupted the city, but when faced with the opportunity to kill Joe Chill, he freezes. He doesn't go through with it and then comes to realize it's not actually what he wants. He's directing his anger and fear at the wrong thing.
You wanted to build between this very personal, paradoxical relationship which we established between Batman and the Joker, as he puts it, the
unstoppable force meets an immovable object.
But we want to see that writ large. We want to see that relationship, the stakes of it are the entire city. And the Joker is going to pull everyone into that conflict. But he's also going to manipulate Batman's weakness, which is a concern for life.
When Batman and the Joker are having their conversation about the Joker's little social experiment, Batman empathizes with the people on those boats. He gets it because that was him. However, he believes and knows that despite all of the shit, the cynicism, the seemingly hopeless state of Gotham, that
this city just showed you that it's full of people ready to believe in good.
These ugly, vicious acts that define the Joker because of his broken ideology will not define them. They're cynical about things. Hell, who wouldn't be? But they don't have to give in to that cynicism. And that's what separates the people of Gotham, Batman, from people like the Joker. They'll prove him wrong.
People were telling me in the darkness of the movie theaters, no matter who they were with, a parent, a date, a spouse, kid, very quietly, they made their own moral determination as to what they would do. For a comic book, superhero movie, to move people to this point, to become so thematically important, to have such heft, to have such weight, is incredible. And that is very specifically one of the ways that the Dark Knight trilogy raised the bar for all comic book films.
It's not that simple. With the Joker, it never is. Until their spirit breaks completely. Until they get a good look at the real Harvey Dent. and all the heroic things he's done.
Harvey becomes what Bruce would have become had he decided to act on his anger and emotional instability in killing Joe Chill, or the people on the boat had they opted to blow up the other boat. He's also reflective of Bruce in this film by having the ego to think
we could be decent men in an indecent time,
that there wouldn't be any collateral damage. His arrogance or naivete causes him to think that it's simply because no one listened to him, but in reality,
things were always going to get worse before they got better.
Gordon is riddled with guilt, but he's steadfast in his convictions. He isn't foolish enough to believe that he's going to walk away unscathed.
That's the point. Far out there, when the structures fail you, when the robots aren't weapons anymore, they're shackles, letting the bad guy get ahead. One day, you may face such a moment of crisis, and in that moment, I hope you have a friend like I did, to plunge their hands into the filth, so that you can keep yours clean.
Batman needed to witness the miracle on the Gotham City harbor so he could understand that his crusade wasn't for nothing, that he has in fact inspired good, not solely in Harvey or vigilantism, but in people. That by acting outside the law as a means to expose the broken system that's infected the soul of Gotham, more Harvey Dents will find the courage to emerge. More ordinary citizens will stand for what's right in order to legitimately combat the corruption in Gotham. The city isn't representative of the Joker. Harvey's stand
against organized crime is the first legitimate ray of light in Gotham in decades.
Working within the system to reform the system. And though he feels alone in this mission, the symbol, the idea he represents, transcends the mere man. In that regard, he and Batman are two sides of the same coin, a legitimate source of change and a necessary force for change, a white knight and a dark knight. The tragedy of it all is Harvey is so idealistic, a contrast to Gordon's pragmatism, so self-assured in making his own luck that when the cards are on the table and he's
the only one who lost everything,
he doesn't know what to do with himself but give in to the pain, loss, and anger that's filled the void in his soul. The miraculous double climax of The Dark Knight acknowledges that people have dark thoughts and impulses, struggle to believe in anything outside of a cynical existence, but it's important to not act on those impulses. Society is filled with people who think that way, but that doesn't mean you can write it all off as being as monstrous as the Joker.
Nolan is notable for his endings, but the ending of The Dark Knight, with its Chandler-esque evocation of a fallen universe in which the truth can never win out, and the best the good guys can hope for is a graceful exit from a rotten system, is magnificent. A perfect slip knot tying up the threads of the plot while setting loose all its ambivalences and ambiguities. The feeling it leaves the viewer with is of being caught up in some much larger, majestic, cyclical movement, a coda to one story that is also the prelude to another.
Chris approaches these films, I think, in a way that's very different than most people or most studios approach these films.
Let's not make a movie just because, there's an appetite for it. Let's make a movie because we have something to say.
You can find so much about the state of the modern world, about terrorism, about the economy.
Urban angst, anguish, fear of chaos, fear of death. Those are the anxieties that are kind of below the mainstream media, below CNN. These are the dark currents that are really kind of, keep us awake at night sometimes.
Who wants to go see a 3-hour movie about terrorism and the economy? But if you do it within the context of a Batman movie, maybe you actually can have more of an effect talking about those things than if you did it more directly.
The opportunity you get with working in a particular genre, like the action movie genre, the superhero genre, it affords you the opportunity to explore things you're interested in or afraid of, neurosis you have, worries you have about the way the world is. It allows you to explore them in a very sort of exaggerated manner, in a way that you can really tap into the collective fears that we have as a society, and particularly in the case of Batman, you have the opportunity through his environment, through Gotham, to really offer a very dark reflection of the society we live in. And we certainly were very careful not to be self-conscious in those aspects.
So we tried to just write a great story first and foremost, but we also tried to be open to what are we really worried about? How does the world feel to us? What would you be most concerned about? In the case of The Dark Knight, it becomes very much about chaos and anarchy and the breakdown of society and so forth. That way, going through that process, you hope to come with something that will resonate with the audience, that will touch something in them.
The film's politics were endlessly decoded.
I've read these op-ed pieces in some of the largest papers, even the New York Times, and the far right is saying, oh, Batman were around, he'd be a Republican, and other people saying, no, he's a much more subversive character, and he'd be very far to the left of the dial.
In the Wall Street Journal, novelist Andrew Klavan penned an op-ed arguing that the film was a paean of praise to the fortitude and moral courage that has been shown by George W. Bush in this time of terror.
The Dark Knight was something that everyone on the political spectrum decided was an apologia for either their side or the other side, depending how annoyed they were by the movie. I remember reading how we were an apologist for George Bush. I'm just like, okay.
George Bush becomes the Dark Knight, who is repudiated by the public, but whose actions have saved us. And at some future date, his decisions, like those of Harry Truman in the Cold War, will be celebrated by historians and the public, wrote Ron Briley of the History News Network. The thing we never did, and I say this with hand on heart, is we never reached for relevance, says Nolan, because we know how long it takes to make a film. The world moves on incredibly fast. So, to us, starting on Batman Begins, it was always about what we were afraid of. And obviously, what we were afraid of post 9/11 was terrorism. At the end of the day, we were sitting there, writing that film 3 years after 9/11. There's no way not to have that be a huge part of things. The whole discussion of the hero becomes the villain at the end of The Dark Knight, and we get the hero we need, not the hero we deserve. All this came about because the concept of heroism became very devalued post 9/11. The Dark Knight films absolutely believe in heroism, but what they say is, true heroism is invisible. That's the kind of heroism that people aspire to, but almost never live up to, in my experience. I feel very good about what we did in the Dark Knight trilogy, because it has been equally claimed by the right and by the left in terms of conversation. And that feels like we win.
These ideas are so pervasive in these movies that you walk out of them and you need to see them again and you're thinking about them and they have an emotional impact on you. Superhero genre movies are not supposed to have any emotional impact on you. They're called popcorn movies for a reason. And you go and you see one of these movies and you realize like half of your popcorn has gone uneaten because you just became completely and totally riveted by the story.
Try not to separate my love for very sophisticated, esoteric filmmakers, people I grew up watching, like Nicholas Rowe, whose films I love, from the side that grew up watching Star Wars and James Bond and loving that. With all the films I've made, I felt that really trying to complement the audience's intelligence, trying to engage the audience with something that's new or different, can pay great dividends.
It's about giving the world of the films and the characters as much weight and validity as they would if your source material were not a comic book.
Comic books themselves were in dialogue with movies. Comic book frames were supposed to look like riffing on movie stills, and then you have this feedback loop. You step out of that loop and just make a terrific film and shoot it beautifully, treat it with respect.
With filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro and Singer and Nolan and Sam Raimi, and we all grew up actually being weaned on these comic books. We loved them, ate, breathed, and slept them. And I think it took that generation of filmmakers to come of age in order to really treat them seriously for the studios to get it.
If you approach these things not for the fans, but as a fan, find something that you love and try to treat it with as much respect as you can, and trust that, that respect and love will show through, even if you have to, and in the cases you pointed out, you have to make choices.
The movies are already watermarks of what can be done. Things to aspire to shoot for. They will forever be reflective of the highest possible way of telling this type of story in our time, with the intelligence and the passion in which we embrace the medium.
Like I said at the beginning, everyone knows The Dark Knight is a masterpiece. This film is uncontested. Again, we know all of this. We talk so much about reverence for the source material, film, character, but how often do we appreciate the remarkable work of art we have? It's not just a movie that the world collectively fawned over, it is truly a cultural touchstone that fundamentally changed the art form. I think we really take this film for granted, man. Like, if you just sit down, eliminate all distractions, turn up the volume, and immerse yourself in this fucking masterful crime epic, you'll realize we're so lucky to be alive during a time where the Dark Knight exists. Rewatching this film reminded me of why it left such an impression on me as a kid. It reminded me of why I love film. It reminded me of the power of the medium and why Christopher Nolan is my favorite filmmaker. I saw Batman Begins as a kid in theaters with my dad, and it was such a special, life-changing experience. The Nolan Batman movies were films we bonded over, shared a reverence for, quoted, would go see at midnight on opening night. They created a special bond with such a special figure in my life I previously felt alienated from. This movie not only shaped my love of movies and my aspirations to be involved in this weird and wonderful industry in the weird and wonderful way that I am, but it also shaped me as a person. Yes, this movie is mature, grounded, dark, all the buzzwords, but more than that, this film and the trilogy as a whole fundamentally understand the heroism and idea a character like Batman represents and the example he sets better than any other film out there. It's important for kids to grow up with films like The Dark Knight. It gives us something to believe in, a watchful guardian who listens to the voices of the city and tailors his actions to fit their needs. You'll never know his name, you'll never know what he sacrificed, and you'll never have to say thank you. Thank you guys so much for sitting through this video, for going on me with this journey. I mean, I just wanted to do something interesting and different with this video that kind of leans into a more documentary style that I've been kind of pursuing over the past couple of years that I feel like would benefit these videos in a way that makes them stand apart, especially for these retrospective videos where there's a lot of, you know, firsthand accounts from the people involved who made the film. And it was such a fulfilling creative exercise that, I don't know, in a way, it kind of just reconnected me with why I love making these videos in the first place. And so thank you for your patience through everything and getting this thing together. Thank you for your support. If you've watched all the way here, that means more than you'll ever know. And thank you first and foremost to our channel members. They are the reason that we're able to keep going. If you want to be a channel member, you should definitely sign up. You get early access to videos, and there's a bunch of other perks there. But most importantly, we have a Discord now, and it's something that's been pretty active over the past month or so. We've got a lot of great conversations going on in there. I actually dropped a few teases for this video in that Discord, and I think that's something that I want to do more of, whether it's teasing a thumbnail, getting feedback from you guys on a video, a thumbnail, stuff you want me to cover, or whether it's just, you know, dropping a video or part of a video early on there. I don't know. I'm still kind of working out the kinks with it, but we're having a lot of fun over there, and you guys should absolutely join that Discord. We're giving YouTube advice over there where, you know, you're allowed to share what you're working on. We're able to just talk and be a community, and that's something that I want to really focus on going forward, is just building out this FilmSpeak community to be the best that I know it can be. Thank you guys so much. It means the world to me. I hope you all loved this video, and we got some more coming your way very, very soon. I think you're going to be stoked on what we've got cooking up. So, all right, I'll catch you guys later. Take care.